Hey YouTube, you already know it's me again, Derek D.C. Phillips, author of Frightful Fables, Tales That Will Leave You Screaming for More. I've got another very special true crime case for you today. This one, like the Atlanta Ripper case, is very old. And I like covering these historic cases because when a case is over 100 years old, I don't really run the risk of upsetting any remaining family members, loved ones. So that's one reason. Another one is that I'm just fascinated by the level of detective work and even the tactics for evading capture in these old cases, because you have to stop and think, you know, people weren't trackable by cell phones. They could pretty much drop their identity, pick up in a new town, and go back to their old disastrous shenanigans. So I think that's one reason that I'm very intrigued by this type of case. I will say that today's case is very scandalous. You will be surprised at the shenanigans that this cast of real-life characters got into in the late 1870s in the southeast of the United States. Throughout this video, you will see clips from newspapers. You will hear narration from a piece that I wrote about this case. Now, I do also want to give a special shout out to the work that has been put into preserving information on this case and many others. Shout out to the Pickens County Historical Society. I'm going to link some information down below in the description box in case you'd like to do a little digging on your own. And without further ado, this is the case of the Hellish Hoedown involving victim Narcissa Fowler Cowart and antagonist or aggressor, however you'd like to frame that, Kate Southern. I think you'll be very, very sucked into this case.
The South has more than its fair share of deep, dark, and twisted secrets, known for their hospitality and their at times peculiar ways. Southerners know a thing or two about killing with kindness, a death wish masked with a bless your heart, a heart attack disguised as a savory plate of biscuits and gravy, isolated by mountains, driven to the brink of insanity by suffocating heat, or oppressed by Bible Belt etiquette. We do our darndest to keep our eccentricities at bay, but crazy can only be kept in the attic for so long. In Greek mythology, Narcissus was a hunter whose stunning looks made him the object of everyone's desire, and the target of Nemesis, the goddess of revenge. Variations of the tale abound, but all share a common end, as the title character is lured to his death as a result of his own vanity. Similarly, today's tale involves a key player named Narcissa Fowler Cowart, to be exact. Reports vary depending on who you ask, but by all accounts, she was a woman who spoke her mind, a trait that wasn't encouraged in the 1870s South. Ultimately, her outspokenness would earn her an invitation to a party she wouldn't survive. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start from the start. Our story begins in the outer environs of Atlanta and comes to a dramatic climax in western North Carolina. In 1877, the South as a whole was on the mend. The Civil War had devastated the region and depleted resources. But in rural Pickens County, business continued more or less as usual. The people of the foothills lived in isolation and remained largely indifferent to the throes of conflict in the burning capital city. Rumors swirled surrounding the allegedly raucous citizens of Pickens, from their odd ways to their abstinence to assimilate to polite society, and their scandalous, even debaucherous parties. Of course, we all know how rumors and legends work. Like a childhood game of telephone, the initial message tends to take on a life of its own. The reputation of one of Pickens County's most controversial residents would also depend on who you asked. As the Atlanta Constitution disclaimed at the time, the tragedy was committed in the heart of Pickens County, beyond the reach of newspapers, and what we know of it is received more through hearsay. Narcissa Fowler Cowart had her fair share of enemies, all on account of her bold mouth. She liked to talk, and in a rural area where everybody knew everybody, and nobody had the modern luxuries of TV or even radio for entertainment, that could be a quick way to make friends. Or foes. By the 1870s, the nation had tired of Civil War news. They were looking for something a bit more salacious, and the sordid circumstances surrounding Narcissa, Sis, Fowler Cowart had it all. News of her death, and her murderer's subsequent trial, would spread far and fast, a precursor to the O.J. Simpsons and Casey Anthonys of today. As the story spread, its players would receive a Hollywood makeover, not unlike Margaret Mitchell's plain yet charismatic Scarlett O'Hara, reimagined as drop-dead vixen Vivian Leigh. The Montana Helena Independent pulled the public into the case with melodramatic flair. Extra, extra! Kate Southern in a thrilling story of an injured wife's revenge. 5 years ago, there lived in Pickens County, among the mountains, as fair a lass as such a region is proverbial for producing, a rosy-cheeked, brown-haired, blue-eyed maiden, with the form of a model and the grace of a gazelle. She was the daughter of a well-to-do farmer, and her smiles were courted by the brave-hearted young mountaineers who engaged in honorable competitions for a monopoly of her society. Among those was a lashing young man, handsome, of princely carriage, and whose fame for courage made known in all the counties around. Dauntless in love, as in all things else, he laid siege to the heart of this mountain belle, to whom she capitulated, and though but a girl in years 17, she was. They were married, and he, feeling secure in her love, repaid her attachment with indifference, and gave more attention to another, a former rival of his wife, than was consistent with his obligation as a husband. She bore this long in silence, and tried to persuade herself that there was nothing wrong in her husband's conduct. But the seed of jealousy was planted in her heart and found nourishment the buoyancy that once existed there. Ere many months the bloom of her cheeks faded, the brilliancy of her eye departed, her laugh was no longer heard, and the once light-hearted and happy girl was changed to the disconsolate and brooding woman. Contemporary local historians doubt that Kate Southern was 100% in on what happened next. Many speculate that she was very much complicit in securing Sis's invitation to a party at a cabin of John Hambrick's, Kate's father. Although the women weren't at all friendly, a male suitor requested Sis's presence to maintain an equal male-female dancing ratio. Sis's reputation as a good-time girl wasn't lost on anyone. The quarters were cramped, the lights were low, and a live fiddler set the mood. Alcohol-fueled confusion ensued, which would explain the muddled reports that would follow. According to reports, Kate had been tripping Sis all night. By the third run-in, Sis had had enough. Kate's actions were clearly intentional. The two squared off in the middle of a square dance, and the music came to a halt. The two went to town, and the fight quickly became a family affair. Kate's husband, Bob, held Sis back, and Sister Amazilia joined in, wailing on the detained Sis and tugging at her hair. In a heartbeat, the squabble escalated from catfight to cold-blooded murder. No one realized what had happened until a flash of blood on metal glinted under lamplight. The Montana Helena Independent again offers a slightly dramatized variation. Stung to the heart at this expedition of perfidy under the roof that sheltered her home, Kate watched her husband dance with Narcissa for a while, her senses seeming to desert her, and then she left her room and sought her father, from whom she ferruled a pocket knife under the pretext of wanting to cut a toothbrush. Securing the knife, she returned to the room in which the dancing was going on, reaching it just as the quadrille ended, and going up to her rival who was moving toward a seat, seized her by the shoulder, and frenzied with jealous rage, said, "You have danced enough," at the same time drawing the open knife from the folds of her dress and plunging it deep into the woman's neck, making a horrible gash which penetrated nearly to the heart. from which the blood spurted several feet into the air and spattered over the late dancers. Again the deadly blade was uplifted, and again it descended, plunged into the left breast in search of the heart, and yet again another blow, when the victim sank to the floor, dead. Kate extracted a pocket knife she used to trim her nails and to cut toothbrushes, tiny branches that locals cut to chew in their spare time, and went to work again with such aggression that she nearly severed her own pinky finger. Once the deed was done, the police were called, along with the undertaker, who at the time made house calls. When they arrived, they found the Hambricks and Southerns washing blood off their persons and their clothing. Kate, however, was nowhere to be found. Rumor has it that she had pulled her over a St. Nick, crawling up into the chimney, which proved to be an ingenious hiding spot. After all, who would think to look there? The undertaker's report documented that as rigor mortis set in, Sis's hand had formed a post-mortem claw around a clump of Kate's raven hair. Once the commotion died down and the authorities went their way, Kate made her daring escape. She took pride in her getaway, boasting that she was the man who murdered Sis, while Kate's sister Amazelia was quickly tried and sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment for her part in the crime. The hunt for Kate and her husband Bob raged on. A total reward was set for $400, which would amount to nearly $10,000 today. The backwoods Bonnie and Clyde were on the lam for more than a year. Mountain trackers, including former Fannin County Sheriff Walter Webb Finley, followed in hot pursuit, determined to collect and divide their reward. Informants led them to the outskirts of Murphy, North Carolina, where the two camps faced off. To everyone's shock and probably morbid delight, Kate had given birth, and the tight-knit family was living among Bob's kin. They were ambushed and finally overtaken over breakfast. Kate, Bob, and baby Southern were hauled back to the Pickens County Jail. Theirs was a part of an outlaw tradition attributed by Professor Robert Scott Davis of Wallace State College in Alabama, as the personal viciousness of the Civil War, a phenomenon that continued for many years, extending to vendettas and robberies. Kate's time of reckoning came when she was put on trial and sentenced to hang at the gallows located a hop, skip, and a jump from Long Swamp Baptist Cemetery, where Narcissa had been put to rest. The fickle public reached consensus as witnesses came forward, claiming to have overheard Kate's premeditated plan to kill Sis if she showed her face at the cabin party. Justice was short-lived, however, as familiar alliances with Georgia's Governor Colquitt scored Kate a commuted sentence. Having narrowly escaped the hangman's noose, she served out her decade-long sentence in a Washington County labor colony. Once released, she started over Alabama, where she started a new chapter with her husband and child. A chapter haunted by the scandal of Narcissa Fowler Cowart and her brutal slaying.